This is a review that's been stewing in my head for a while. I actually wrote a script to review this game years ago and ditched it because I thought the script was too boring and I couldn't fix it. Star Wars Shadows of the Empire was one of the 8 Nintendo 64 games to launch the year the system was released. It was an iconic fixture of the Nintendo 64's library, and in its own strange way a landmark in the realm of licensed games, and yet there's something about this game that's been bugging me for years, ever since I first played it. So to get this little gremlin out of my head once and for all, let's take a look at Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. Oh, I love that dark foreboding music. This theme will be stuck in my head for days. Shadows of the Empire is primarily a third-person shooter. You run around levels blasting enemies, searching for panels or keys to open doors, and making your way to the end of the stage to fight a boss. There is a bit of enemy variety with troopers, floating droids, fast-moving rolling droids, and some wall-mounted turrets, but you only have one gun, a simple blaster that never runs out of ammo. You do get a few sidearms, but they're pretty much useless. The pulse cannon and flamethrower are close-range weapons in a game where you almost never fight at close range. The disruptor is a BFG that you'll rarely find, and if you have any sense at all, you'll save it for the final boss. There's a stunner that I think only appears in the last foot level, and the only gun you find a good amount of ammo for, the Seeker missiles, miss their targets about half the time. The most use I had for Seekers was to clear blind corners, since enemies ambush you all the freaking time. You'll walk into a room, and no matter how careful you are, an enemy will start shooting you in the ass before you know what's there. Ow! Jeez, it's a... There's little to no variety in the combat, but the levels themselves pick up the slack to keep the gameplay varied. Several levels put an emphasis on platforming, either running over spinning machinery, jumping large distances in a jetpack, the junkyard stage that turns the entire level into one long jumping puzzle as you hop across constantly disengaging train cars, and, controversially for an early shooter game, a swimming level that doesn't suck. In addition to the foot levels, the game has 6 vehicle stages. There's an asteroid field turret stage with smooth controls and fast action, a bike racing stage, a combination turret stage and flying level reminiscent of an early Rogue Squadron, and of course the game's most famous level, the Battle of Hoth. This game basically invented Rogue Squadron's formula. The controls are smooth, the enemies are well balanced, it's easier to maneuver and land hits, and the game requires careful maneuvering and strategy. You have to carefully track enemy positions, constantly scour the map for safe zones, and only attack when you have the advantage or else you get torn to pieces. And it's still thrilling on medium difficulty and above. This one stage made Shadows an instant icon of the Nintendo 64. For the first time, it truly reenacted one of cinema's most iconic scenes, and it was an early shining example of the potential of the shift to 3D in video games. Shadows of the Empire's most distinctive characteristic in my mind is the way that it blends genres. Apart from switching between well-developed vehicle stages and ground levels, the ground levels themselves are a shifting blend of shooter and platformer to where every single level in the game is distinct and memorable. You could make a valid argument the game spreads itself too thin, i.e. if you like the Battle of Hoth, you just have to play the Battle of Hoth over and over again because there aren't any other levels like it, but this design gives Shadows of the Empire a unique and varied identity that no other game I can think of has mimicked. Gameplay is also kept compelling by the fact your lives and ammo carry over from one stage to the next. You're encouraged to play methodically and explore levels for items because every life you lose to carelessness or weapon that you fire in a tight spot is gone for good the entire rest of the game. To extend the game, you can replay levels to set yourself up better for future stages, and the game has challenge points that you can seek out for extra lives. Although these damn things require such precise movement or to be so OCD with your exploration that you'll probably give up on them like I did, all in all, I still find it to be an enjoyable and compelling game to this day. In spite of how the ground levels kind of suck. The ground levels use tank controls for basic movement where you turn in place when you try and go left and right. It's always a crapshoot whether dash will walk or turn in place when you try to move diagonally, as the game awkwardly tries to guess what to do, and it leads to the controls being awkward and stiff. If you try to turn while walking, dash will kind of slide until it eventually takes off walking in the direction that you want, and it always seems to take dash a second or two to lurch to a start or stop every time you touch the control stick. The controls always feel slippery, and you tend to slide off any surface that isn't perfectly horizontal. Oh, come the fuck on! I still hold my breath every single time I make a jump because I still don't trust myself not to misalign a jump or slide off one of the platforms. Jumps have such huge arcs, it's hard to maneuver with any precision, and if you've got it as muscle memory that you can turn in mid-jump like most platformers, yeah, that shit don't work here. I was stuck on the train level for ages when I was a kid because it's really easy for a single jump to go off course or come up short and send you plummeting to an instant death, especially since several barriers knock off huge chunks of health if you don't guess when to jump correctly. Trains will shift elevations to screw with jumps that it seems you should be able to clear, and you just have to guess which of two trains abruptly goes into a bottomless pit. It takes a lot of practice to get used to the controls enough to get through the platforming puzzles, and it just shouldn't be this hard to master basic movement. The only way to shoot up or down is to stand in place and hold Z, but in this mode you can barely aim left or right, forcing you to line up with an enemy before you take aim at them. It's very stiff. Alternatively, you can typically count on dash to aim at enemies elevated above you automatically. He just takes his damn sweet time to do it, and he doesn't adjust his aim if you're moving. It generally just feels hard to kill enemies without taking several hits, either because enemies take lots of fire and don't flinch, you have to stand still to line up shots above you, or strafing isn't effective between low speed and tight hallways. And unless you're playing on the pretty casual easy difficulty, damage piles up and kills you fast. What keeps the game playable is that the camera is never a problem. The camera always stays behind you so you can perfectly see what you're doing, and bad cameras were the biggest problem that plagued Nintendo 64 games. Just to be safe, the devs threw in several alternative camera settings you can switch to, like restrictive first-person and overhead modes that actually come in handy because Dash's body sometimes blocks the action, and whatever unholy abomination this load of shit is. One of the camera options kind of sits the camera in one stationary position off to the side and turns as you run past it, and it's freaking impossible to see anything that you're doing! Who in their right mind would even think this camera is any kind of useful to anybody? The in-game explanation is that it makes the action look like a movie, but even Michael Bay's cinematography looks better than this! There are 3 levels in the game that I just can't stand. As a kid, I hated the Gaul Spaceport level because it's one tightrope and platforming puzzle after another, and I kept falling from the slippery controls. As an adult, I hate this level because it's at least twice the length of the other stages. I played this twice on medium difficulty. The first run took an hour, the second took 45 minutes, between scavenging items and having to go slow so you don't get killed by all the enemy ambushes. F! 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 The second stage I hate is the Mos Eisley level where you drive a swoop bike and have to kill about 20 goons by driving alongside them, ramming them, and just kind of hoping that they eventually die. This level is so tight and cramped that you crash or get hung up on obstacles constantly. Grazing anything brings you to a dead halt, and your top speed is so obnoxiously higher than all the enemies that you have to fiddle with A and B to micromanage your speed every time you catch up to an enemy. And the killer is, every time you get caught on the terrain, the enemies actually slow down so you can catch up to them. So they knew this level sucked, and their response was just to make it easy. God, this ramp can't be used as a ramp! Damn you, Tails! You lied to me! And this may be petty, but I also hate the Imperial Freighter level. Beyond constantly getting ambushed around corners, the centerpiece of this stage is a huge cargo room that you have to cross by slowly and tediously opening every door until you find out where the ramps that can be used as ramps are hidden. Dash even inexplicably doesn't have his jetpack, despite having it before this stage and having it for every stage after, just so they could fit in this dumb room. It's a dirt simple, but nonetheless very time-consuming puzzle, since you're conditioned to check every room for items, and it takes forever every time you need to blow up a box to check for an item inside. For 2.5 levels you get a jetpack, but it has basically no utility in combat since it's hard to fly and aim simultaneously with the stiff controls, and the thing moves so slowly and has such sluggish controls it's not even much fun to use. It feels like there's a lag to everything the jetpack does. It takes ages to turn, it takes a second to gain altitude, and the jetpack can't go very far before it needs to land and recharge. It's only used as a jump really far function to clear large gaps, which only exists to make the jetpack useful. About the only thing the jetpack is good for is the sewer level where you use use it to swim, which is really intuitive, but things turn to shit the second you're required to have precise control with the damn thing. You get to the boss and you're expected to have precise maneuvering to dodge instant kill tentacles and line up perfect shots with the thing's eye. The laggy controls have Dash drunkenly swerve back and forth just trying to keep yourself steady. You fight the controls more than you fight the boss. Of course, I did forget that you can strafe in the jetpack while recording this. That might have helped. While we're on the subject of bosses, the ATST is dirt simple. You run behind it where it can never land a hit on you, and you shoot it in the head. Why they make you fight this thing twice is beyond me. The Slave 1, well, first you fly around for 5 minutes wondering why none of your shots do any damage until you either look up or discover by accident that only shooting it in the engines kills it. So again, you just run behind it where it can't shoot you. The humanoid bosses have really strange balancing. Your blaster barely scratches them, but the secondary weapons deal so much damage that you can just about suicide charge each boss. Take Boba Fett, for example. You're supposed to fight him by flying around this arena outmaneuvering him, trading shots despite it being ridiculous to land hits with the stiff aiming and sluggish jetpack, or Leroy! There, dead in a few seconds. The loader droid, you either have to very carefully strafe around him or tediously run away and land a few hits when he stops to extend his arms, or Leroy! My favorite boss in the game is IG-88, this freaking scary Terminator dude that blends in with the environment and wanders around making the hell is that noises. You have to play cat and mouse with him, carefully hunt him around the map until you lose your patience and Leroy! I mean, the side weapons suck in the actual levels anyway. There's no reason not to splurge them on bosses to conserve lives. And then there's the king of all bullshit final boss, the Gladiator droid. This boss has 3 phases, and for the third, he turns into a disembodied head that you can barely hit and fires a continuous laser that just outright murders you over and over again. Hope you're stocked up on disruptors and lives, shithead, 'cause Leroy rides again! By and large, Shadows of the Empire isn't that bad. The game hasn't aged particularly well and the trudging, sluggish controls are a pain, but the game is still fairly fun to revisit, and it has some moments of great atmosphere with dark, mysterious graphics and music. So why have I been dying to talk about this game for years now? Because Shadows of the Empire's story is utter crap, and it's utter crap on purpose. Shadows of the Empire was released as a book, a series of comics, and as a video game. You'd think they'd all be adaptations of the same story, but they're not. The book has the main storyline following Luke, Leia, and Darth Vader, the comic follows Boba Fett transporting Han to Jabba the Hutt, and the video game follows new character Dash Rendar on a side quest that weaves in and out of both the book and the comics. If you only bought and played the video game, which is probably north of 90% of the game's player base, then you got a blatantly incomplete product with barely any story to speak of. Myself, I was 5 when the game came out. I didn't know there was a damn book until I got to the end credits, and I didn't know the book was mandatory reading until I idly researched the game in my 20s. I still haven't read the book because I object to being forced to do homework to make a game suck less. So why, oh why, did George Lucas split Shadows of the Empire into 3 separate mediums that you need to Voltron together if you want the full story? Because merchandise. See, George Lucas originally didn't want to go into production on the Star Wars prequels because he didn't know if Star Wars was still popular enough for prequel merchandise to sell. He made Shadows of the Empire explicitly because he needed an excuse to release new Star Wars merch to test the market and determine whether hypothetical prequel toys would sell. Shadows of the Empire was a huge success, likely primarily off the video game, and thus assured that he'd make a mint on the toy line. Only then did George Lucas begin production on the prequels. So the next time a whiny Star Wars fan complains that Disney turned Star Wars into a cash cow, prescribe them a powerful laxative because they are full of shit! Literally the only reason Shadows of the Empire exists is to sell merchandise as a prelude to selling more merchandise. The cash cow ship sailed and returned home with a tropical disease long before Disney came into the picture. The vast majority of people who watch Star Wars movies and play Star Wars video games don't give the first hair of a rat's ass about the expanded universe. They bought Shadows of the Empire rightfully expecting a standalone product. So I'm going to review this broken shambles of a story as a standalone product, and if you have a problem with that, feel free to kiss my wide, white ass! The game follows Dash Rendar, a handsome, dashing rogue smuggler and skilled pilot with an ostensibly ugly round ship that he brags about being the fastest in the galaxy, and a non-human co-pilot that follows him around everywhere. And if you're thinking, gee, that sounds exactly like Han Solo, you're way off! Han Solo has a personality. Dash Rendar is friggin' boring. He's just dumb muscle hired by the Rebellion who's perfect at everything, and unlike other powerful characters like Rey and Starkiller who still have character flaws that drive the plot, Dash is a total cipher with shoulder pads in place of actual character traits. Oh, you shut your filthy whore mouth! Dash is a great character! In the book...
Nobody cares.
Anyway, Dash is delivering supplies to the rebel base on Hoth just as the Empire invades. Dash just happens to be longtime best friends with Han Solo, and for no readily apparent reason, Han gets Luke to let Dash into Rogue Squadron. Dude's around for 10 seconds, and he just sight unseen gets let into the rebels' most elite fighter squad. After 3 levels reenacting the first act of The Empire Strikes Back, we're introduced to the closest thing the game has to a main villain, Prince Xizor. Xizor is the head of the Black Sun Crime Syndicate, which does... crime stuff. I don't know, they never explain it. Apparently Darth Vader has bounty hunters trying to capture Luke alive, and Xizor has secretly changed their orders to kill Luke on sight. See, Xizor thinks that if Darth Vader fails to turn Luke over to the dark side, then Palpatine will cast him out so Xizor can become the Emperor's new right-hand man. Oh, wow, I don't even know where to begin with how dumb this plan is. Darth Vader is the last remaining powerful Force user in the galaxy, a powerful Sith Lord known and feared across the galaxy with decades of experience commanding the Emperor's armies. Xizor is rich. And that's it. In what plane of existence is Palpatine going to ditch Vader for a guy whose assets begin and end with having money? But second, how does Xizor know that Darth Vader is trying to turn Luke over to the dark side for Palpatine? The only way he could possibly know that is if he somehow knows about Vader and the Emperor's private conversations, but then shouldn't he know that Palpatine doesn't really give a shit whether Luke turns or dies as long as he's out of the way?
He will join us or die, Master.
This plot only makes sense if we assume Xizor just flat out watched The Empire Strikes Back, but also if we assume he just tuned out very specific parts of it. Kind of like the Star Wars fans who tuned out the parts in Return of the Jedi where Luke is repeatedly demonstrated to give in to the dark side in moments of stress or weakness and only backs out at the absolute last possible second and then claim it's out of character when the exact same thing happens in The Last Jedi. Xizor is just a terrible villain. His plan has a 0% chance of working, he has barely any involvement with the plot, and any actual motivation or character he has been slashed because it's in the book. That's why you read the book, idiot! In the book, Xizor, we are not talking about the fucking book! We are talking about the video game where Xizor is a dumbass who barely has any presence in the story. Anyway, we learned via text crawl that for no readily apparent reason, considering they've never met, Leia has hired Dash to rescue Han before he's taken to Jabba the Hutt. Dash tracks down a bounty hunter IG-88 who's also after Boba Fett, and for no readily apparent reason, 88 just immediately spills where Fett is. Dash tracks down Boba Fett and beats the living man shit out of him. Dash completely foobars the widely established most badass man in the galaxy in a one-on-one fight, and then, for an encore, Dash completely blows up Boba Fett's ship single-handed with a handgun when he tries to get away. And then Boba Fett escapes off-screen. No, I'm not shitting you. Beat to hell, broken jetpack, his ship a flaming wreck, no way out of this room. It just cuts to a text crawl saying, yeah, Boba Fett just got away. And I guess he just took the massive lunk of carbonite with Han Solo inside with him or something. In retrospect, building 20% of the campaign around a side quest that's doomed to fail might not have been the best idea. So now that we've spent 2 missions on a plotline that went absolutely nowhere and we're halfway through the game, there's another text crawl and the plot basically completely resets. You read in text that an assassin tried to kill Luke, and now Leia has hired Dash again to protect Luke while he meditates on Tatooine. See, the entire central premise of the book is that Jedi Knight Luke is completely powerless without a lightsaber. So useless, in fact, that he can't handle common street rats unless the new action figure Dash Rendar kills every last bad guy for him. Dash meets up with Luke and explains that Leia is infiltrating Black Sun to try and figure out who's trying to kill him. Really, Without a scrap of evidence, Leia just spontaneously happens to pick the one organization that's run by the main villain. It's like the coincidence to end all coincidences. Luke says that Black Sun just gave the Alliance the location of an Imperial supercomputer, so Dash boards an Imperial freighter while Luke keeps watch, and what do you know? Dash steals the plans for the second Death Star! Really, in stark contrast to both the movie and other expanded universe works, new character Dash Rendar is now solely responsible for stealing the second Death Star plans. Oh, it gets better, because Shizor deigns to show his face for the first time in 4 levels, and it turns out the Battle of Endor was all his idea. Shizor was the one who came up with the plan to lure the rebels to the supposedly non-operational Death Star, and not Palpatine. So now these worthless-ass characters have been retconned into being vitally important and single-handedly responsible for the plot of the movies. Why does that sound so familiar? So then there's, son of a bitch, another text crawl appears and completely resets the story a 3rd time. Leia meets with Shizor off-screen. She figures out that Shizor is evil and gets kidnapped off-screen. The rebels and Vader find out that Shizor is playing both sides off-screen. And Luke, Lando, and Dash head to Shizor's palace to rescue Leia. Yet again, over the course of a single cut, the story completely skips over several critical events, and the story completely changes in a matter of seconds. Imagine you were watching The Empire Strikes Back for the very first time. You're at the part where Luke begins his training on Dagobah and Han and Leia are inside the cave monster, and then it just immediately cut to Luke on his way to fight Vader with nothing but a single title card bridging the gap. And then you found out years later the rest of the story was in a book you were just supposed to know about. This story is bullshit. So rescuing Leia presents a bit of a problem. Shizor's palace is on Coruscant, the capital of the entire Empire, and a few blocks away from the palace of Palpatine himself. It's got to be the most heavily secured place in the entire galaxy, so it's got to be damn near impossible for known rebel leaders to get inside. Wrong! They just straight up fly 2 of the most wanted ships in the entire galaxy within spitting distance of the Emperor's house with no troubles. Kinda makes you wonder why the rebels don't just send one ship to firebomb Palpatine's palace and end the war then. They sneak in through the sewers, Dash plants bombs on a thing while Luke and Lando rescue Leia off-screen. They blow up Shizor's palace, but he flees to an orbital space station. Yeah, you never directly fight Prince Shizor, and he never actually appears on screen again after he takes credit for the Battle of Endor. The main villain's full contribution to the plot is to do 2 things behind the scene that we're told about secondhand, and that's it. Just brilliant. So now we get another turret section blowing up wave after wave of Shizor's holy hell! If you play on normal difficulty or higher, the Star Vipers just rip you to shreds. You take it up the ass and get shot to death from off-screen over and over again. I always wondered why this stage was rigged to give you extra life if you blow up enough Star Vipers, last-second rebalancing for a broken-ass level. Then you have to blow up Shizor's skyhook. This level is dirt simple once you know what you're doing. You have to blow up 4 self-healing turrets by flying straight to them and firing all your missiles at once, then fly to the core and shoot it, and that's it. There are a ton of enemy ships in the area, but they all completely ignore you while you attack the skyhook. Don't get me wrong, it's a fun enough level, and the music is beyond epic. It just feels like a missed opportunity in kind of a limited level. So the skyhook blows up, Shizor, I guess, is dead, the game kind of forgets about him, but Dash doesn't make it out of the skyhook alive, and the game ends on Luke and Leia mourning the loss of that guy they just kind of barely knew before the beginning of Return of the Jedi. Unless you beat the game on medium difficulty or higher, in which case you find out Dash survived and just abandoned his friends like a dick because he wasn't getting paid anymore. You know, this is one of those cases where I kind of prefer the game's bad ending. It's worth noting before we sign off that 9 months after the game's initial release, Shadows of the Empire was ported to the PC. In addition to having fully animated cutscenes and voice acting, the PC version makes several subtle changes to the script. It tones down Dash's Mary Sue tendencies and cuts out the stupid-ass scene where Shizor is behind the Battle of Endor. It's still not a good story, but it is an improvement over the base game. The PC version runs ridiculously smoothly with tighter controls and much more crisp animation, but the aiming controls are abysmal. The PC game opts to emulate the Nintendo 64 game, and you can only aim up or down by holding a button, which defaults to V, and then using the movement keys to aim instead of just using the mouse like every other PC shooter. It's insanely awkward to use when the PC's control scheme should make it unnecessary. What were they thinking? Again, I don't hate Shadows of the Empire. I still think it's a fun enough game, and it's earned its place as an iconic fixture of the Nintendo 64. It just pisses me off that they gave the game a blatantly incomplete and completely unsatisfying story to shill a tie-in book and comic book series. Potentially decent products ruined by anti-consumer business practices. I guess some things never change.